Hi and welcome to the next episode of Beyond the Bubble. And it's a great pleasure to have here someone I greatly admire, who I consider a friend, and someone with a very unique style and approach to life. I think that's a fair thing to say about you, Laura.
Thank you, Andras.
Because you asked me how I'm going to introduce you, and I didn't even know that 30 seconds ago. And what I said now, I think we're going to keep that. We're not going to cut that out.
Okay, fair enough. So where do you want to take it from here then?
Well, I want to ask you, how would you introduce yourself and how you landed in Brussels?
I ended up here like a lot of people do. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Brussels. I know that's hard to believe, but I grew up in the UK, half American, half British. And I worked as a journalist there for 8 years before I came here. So I used to work for the CNN, BBC, CNBC. Only acronyms you're ever going to hear me use today. And the reason I ended up here is because my husband came on a secondment for his last job. So he's a lawyer. And I decided to come too for the adventure. And that was 15 years ago. And we were meant to be here for 2. And it's like a lot of people, things happen, right? You quite like it. You make some friends. And then you have kids. Major world events happen that make Belgium seem like quite a good place to live. And the rest is history. Oh, and I set up a business. And that kind of worked out. So it's what I'm still doing today.
Kind of.
Kind of.
So you're a journalist originally, is that right?
I was a journalist originally.
You were a journalist.
But I don't consider myself to have been a journalist. So we have some mutual friends who are journalists. They love journalism. It's in their blood.
And is it, I don't even know what's the official term, like video journalism versus
Broadcast?
written? Or
I was a broadcast journalist.
broadcast
I
journalist.
started in TV, and unusually I actually went to radio. And the reason I started in TV is because I was started at CNN. And I was applying for internships after my gap year. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a strong drive to do anything, but I knew I wanted it to be international. And I wanted something that would bring out some of my American culture. So I thought CNN would be a good place. And they didn't really want to give me an internship because I wasn't a journalism graduate. So I nagged them for a bit, and then I went off traveling in South America. And on the first day I arrived in South America, it was the day before 11th of September 2001. And obviously this is all pre-iPhones, pre-social media. And I went straight into the jungle with some friends. And we didn't find out what had happened to the Twin Towers until about a week and a half later, until we were booking flights to go to Bolivia, because we were in Brazil at the time. This is me and my friend. And the reason it freaked me out so much is partly because it was horrendous, obviously, what had happened, but also because my father was there and because we are half American. So my dad was in New York when it happened. And I obviously didn't know what had happened until I managed to get to a payphone and call. And so then I thought, should I come home? Because obviously the world is on fire. And being in South, or it felt like it was, and being in South America is very different from how people reacted, say, in Europe or the UK, for example. It was a different take, which was an interesting component. And then I thought, should I come home? But I stayed glued to watching CNN and the BBC the entire time I was there. And I came out, I was like, right, this is what I want to do. But just to finish on that, that was a huge lesson in geopolitics and also about on America messing around in the world. Because we started just before 9/11. And I flew out of Buenos Aires in Argentina on the day they defaulted on the debt. And all the protests with the pots and pans started. So that was quite the eye-opener. So that's how I came to journalism. But it was less to do with journalism and more to do with world affairs, which is a slightly different take.
And what was that reaction that you hinted at, where you were in South America and people learned about 9/11?
Well, God, I'm getting right into the weeds of it. Not sympathetic, actually. And I don't expect people to be sympathetic per se. But I think that if you are clearly in shock yourself, or there are people grieving and people are dying, and I know which territory we could be getting into, I think that is not the day to tell people to get into the discussion about foreign policy. I think it's too early. And I also think a lot of people who died on 9/11, they were not Americans. So for me, it was less about, yes, obviously there's the link to it because my father was there and we are from there and because I'd spent a lot of time in New York. But it's also, this is the pre-social media era. Seeing that kind of thing on live TV, we hadn't really seen that ever. And that it doesn't mean it was the first atrocity that ever happened. Of course it wasn't. I mean, look at Bosnia, Congo in our lifetimes even. But it's the first time I think we've seen something like that play out in real time on the media.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm glad there was no social media at the time, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it probably would have been even more intense, even more conspiracies, even more
Oh yeah, well they haven't gone
chaos.
away, have they?
No, definitely not. But I'm just saying that with social media,
Yeah, awful.
the issue got a billion times worse.
Well, we've talked about this before as well, and I don't, on Israel and Gaza, this conflict that is happening now, this particular flare-up rather, we didn't have social media for previous ones, and it's managed to take it to a whole other level, which is saying something.
No, now that you say that, it reminds me that after 9/11, I got a chain mail. Remember those when those emails were forwarded to a million people, right? Like it's no more. It's not reposting or sharing or anything like that, but it was essentially emails being forwarded to tons of people.
Yeah.
And I got one of those from a friend of my brother, I think it was. Never mind. And it was a full-on conspiracy about what happened, why it happened on 9/11 and all the rest, which, again, took a much more intense form with different movies and so-called documentaries and all those. What I'm saying is that was already a shock to me to say, okay, this framing and this way of interpreting what happened, it's out there, it's gaining traction, people are sharing it, and perhaps the most shocking thing to me was that this guy who I knew, it was a friend of my brother, but I also knew him relatively well. I said, this guy buys into this? Right? It's the realization that somebody attributes credibility to something so outlandish and someone that I know. And of course, with social media, that gained a whole different meaning. But at that time already to say, it's not only the theory, conspiracy theory, or those concepts being out there, but somebody that I know and sort of trust, and trust him as a person and his judgment, actually endorses this, actually buys into this.
It's really tough. I mean, it's hard when to not come at it with judgment and to know how to handle it a lot of the time, because sometimes we think, well, clearly your opinion on this is so far removed from mine that we're like, what steps, which turns of the rabbit hole did you make when your reality has been bent to this point? It's like when you watch some of the online people who start off on the left and then their arc takes them over to the far right, and it's like, what happened to you that this has become your new reality, that there's a sort of coherence and a logic to it, and that this is how you see it, right? This isn't just about information, it's something else.
It's narratives.
It is, of course it's stories. Everything's stories, and nature abhors a vacuum, and people don't like complex responses. They like simple solutions, and a conspiracy theory is a simple one.
And it's storytelling at its best. But I want to bridge it back with your journalistic kind of coming of age. So you went back to the US and you became a journalist.
I went to the UK.
UK, sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
So I worked for CNN International
in
London.
the UK.
Yeah. So when I say I wanted to do something with my American side, I mean, I didn't want to move to Atlanta. I was given that option. That's where CNN is based.
Yeah.
But I did want to do something that had a very strong international component to it, and I did want the option of having something that's more American, and I liked it. I mean, the huge difference between working somewhere like there and working at the BBC was when you work for CNN, yes, you're in London, but you're not doing UK news. You're only doing UK news as it, makes the world news agenda. When I went to the BBC, it was literally like Westminster. And then, people would be able to quote which politicians were on which committees back in 1922. It's a bit like Brussels, basically.
Yeah.
And just how English everything was. And of course it would be, because it's the domestic broadcaster and also it's the national media. So you would see it that way. But I've never felt like I was one of those people. I always had a world take on it, or in a more international one. Like I've never considered, even though I sound incredibly British, and my education and my work experience makes me very much a product of the establishment, I have never been enamored or in awe of the British political system or any of the institutions there.
But what did you cover at the time?
So which one are you talking about, the BBC or are you talking about before?
Well, we can take both. I meant BBC, but
so the BBC was I did a lot of economic stuff, so it was a lot of budget type related things in the UK economy, but it was also, I did a lot of stuff on Latin America, and then it was political. So when I went into radio programs, I used to work for Radio 4, and it's whatever comes up. But on one day you'll be covering, I don't know, some report that's come out of the House of Commons. And then in the next sequence, you'll be doing something on, I don't know, the Middle East. And then you'll be doing something on, usually back to the UK though. And so obviously people want to hear news that's more local, but I've just never been that interested in covering the national element only. I've always been more interested in the international.
But that was global affairs mostly, the one that really resonated with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's partly because of being half British, half American. My dad's very into international politics.
Oh, by the way, your dad was okay after 9/11. So
Yeah. He was absolutely fine. I mean, he wasn't fine, if you know what I mean, but he was fine. And they were in Midtown. They weren't down but he did work in finance.
Yeah.
So they were in Midtown. I think they heard the second plane come down. And he was all right, and he was on the first flight out, but nobody could get out for like a week or something. So, and he wasn't fine, but he was fine physically. And he was glad to be alive and all the rest of that. But I think it did very strange, unsurprisingly, we know this, it did very strange things to people for a while. That makes me sound like he did go down some hole. He didn't, but he was when the war in Afghanistan started, he was quite pro that because he'd been quite whipped up by the experience of being in New York, but he was incredibly anti the invasion of Iraq. So you can't put my dad in a box on anything. He was furious about what Bush and Blair did, and he could never forgive Blair for Iraq, never, even now. So it's an interesting, you can't put him in a box on anything, but it certainly had some impulses that came out. You can see why wars do things and attacks do things to people's emotions.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shock to...
It's a shock, and it brings out your most primal emotions, and it's fear, and everything's been attacked, and it's security, and
especially it was physically so close, he may have...
Yeah, and it's loss and it's trauma, yeah.
It's a trauma.
Absolutely.
It's a full-on trauma.
And, trauma happens all the time, all around the world. I mean, one of the things that's interesting at the moment is, well, I'll come back to that. Trauma happens everywhere all the time. There's constant war. I mean, the world is an absolute hot mess, and it's terrible what some people live with all the time. But if you've grown up and you've never been exposed to that, then the experience that you have of trauma is relative, right? You can't experience something that you've never been exposed to or had contact with. So in some ways, he's lucky that that's all that he was exposed to.
Yeah.
And that he was nearly 60 when it happened. I'm not saying that other things didn't happen.
No, but that's the thing, because if you're exposed to that as an adult, chances are you have more tools and you're just more mature or physically just more able to find ways to...
You think?
I think so. Because only if you take the counterpart, which is if you're exposed to it as a child or as an infant or someone very young, you definitely have no tools to even process or understand what happened to you. So at least as an adult, you have certain things at your disposal through which you can find a better way forward.
Well, I think that's true to an extent, but I think we're also seeing that from the position of our generation, potentially. I think that, even things like PTSD, when I worked at the BBC, there was still they're not great with it now, a lot of the male journalists, but a lot of the older ones, it was something that they just didn't talk about. And I think a lot of, certainly older men, we talk about tools and ways to help ourselves. That requires them to even think in that way, rather than coming from a place of, we don't talk about this, or I'm fine, or I'll be okay. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I think where you're coming from is that there's an assumption built into that you would use those tools.
So perhaps I would layer that or nuance that with, based on what you're saying, the cultural context in which you are and in which this happens has a massive impact. Because you take our parents' generation and the ones before, having lived through a trauma, which they wouldn't even label it as such, maybe it was a war, maybe it was some atrocity or something like that, it was sort of part of life, not necessarily for that everyone and every time, but still it was an important part. But they would just say, put up with it, cope with it, and it's not a thing.
You haven't got a choice.
Right? And no choice. But in the past few decades, maybe that's an exaggeration, but say 20-ish years, at least there's a more important cultural awareness around such a thing. There's psychology, there's healing, there are so many topics and conversations around this being a thing and this having a massive impact on your mental health and on your life.
Absolutely. Well, look, I mean, in my family, this is a very good example because we have alcoholism, we have addiction, and we have neurodivergence and mental health issues on predominantly on one side of the family, but on another. And I've seen the impact of that on family members. And the coping responses have been very different in various cases. I don't want to go too much more into that now, just because I feel like it's not all of my stories to share. But generationally, you're absolutely right. There's a lot more openness about that stuff now. I mean, there's still work to be done on it, but there's much more acceptance that the nervous system is a fragile thing, and that the sort of mind-body connection is becoming, fortunately, more pronounced again, even though I think lots of people still think it doesn't exist, which is ridiculous. So I think in that sense, you're right. There is more of that. But I think it's more for our generation and maybe slightly older, but not that one level above, the boomers.
Yeah. I think...
Or not,
again,
well,
we
a certain
could go...
kind of boomer.
I won't pick up on the boomer part, but I want to look at that part where with mind, body, and just more than coping, trying to heal in the best possible way.
Well, why did you call it healing?
Say again?
Why do you call it healing?
Healing?
Yeah. Tell me what you meant by healing.
What
I
mean
know
by
it's not
healing.
like I'm being passive aggressive. I'm just curious.
No, healing. I think healing, I'm trying to define where I would draw the line. Because I think coping, probably, at least the way I interpret that is, you still have that anxiety, trauma, PTSD, or any other, and you find a certain mechanism, be that drinking, addiction, or any other way, where you kind of suppress it, and it's momentary,
Okay, yeah.
right? Like it's temporary easing of that particular pain without truly treating the root cause. And if you're able, to the degree you're capable, and to the degree you have the tools to heal those roots, then you're no longer going to have a need to suppress the difficulties.
Yeah. I mean, where I would... so I think obviously in broad terms there's specific incidents, which is what I referred to just back then, and there's broader stuff. In terms of healing, the reason I sort of challenge that term is because I think that healing often isn't necessarily something that fully happens, but the experience gets integrated and it becomes part of the story, not the
Improving,
whole
if you will.
story. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not trying to be pedantic or hostile to what you're saying, but as somebody, I mean, we're sort of going to get there, and you know this about me. I'm a chronic depressive. I struggle with anxiety. I was also diagnosed with ADHD and dyspraxia last year, which means the neurodivergence would have definitely played into that, and that's part of the family history story as well. And one of the things that I do is I don't like talking about healing in some ways, because this is my ongoing experience and it's part of who I am, and it's more about how to healing applies as something almost to be cured of, which I know is not what you necessarily meant, but I see it as something where it's about making sense of these disparate parts and how do you sort of bring it together and accept it. I sort of think maybe, and I know that we're talking maybe about slightly different things, how I tend to look at a lot of this stuff is it's about accepting, carrying it, making it easier.
Yes.
I know we're going to disagree on this, aren't we?
Yeah, some bit of it. Perhaps I'm forever hopeful, or perhaps some experiences I've had have led me to believe that a significantly better way of living your daily life, or existing for that matter, is possible. So what I hear from you is a certain discounting of the possibility of significantly improving, let's not say healing. It's more about finding healthy or relatively healthy coping mechanisms and integrating that into your life and accepting it. So is it about putting up with a certain condition that, whether you were born with, whether it's something that has come to your life because of the experiences you had, and just kind of giving up the hope? Perhaps that's what I'm getting at, where isn't there a better way of quality of life existing and finding flourishing? Or is it cooking with what I have and not hoping for a better state of mind?
I think there are certain things that you can change, but there are certain things that you can't. So, for example, if you have ADHD, I don't know how much you know about it. People have this idea that if you're ADHD, it's just about distraction, you can't pay attention, but it's actually a lot more than that. And, obviously Gabor Mate, his argument about ADHD is that a lot of people are born with the genetic tendency, if you like. But predisposition.
My wife is a doctor. I know these words.
Okay, you know this, but I'm thinking about the listeners. The genetic predisposition to it, but that doesn't mean it will form, if that's the right word, or that it will present. You might carry, some people carry the same genes, but it doesn't necessarily come out, and it's a trauma or something that makes that happen. Some people think it just happens anyway, right? And I don't know enough about it to sort of do the nature, nurture, environment, genetics, all of that stuff. I do think, though, that if your nervous system and your brain are demonstrably wired in a way that the mainstream society doesn't fit with mainstream society, you will struggle, right? You can talk about hope and you can talk about making your life easier and you can do all of those sorts of things. But historically, and one of the reasons why so many women are being diagnosed now is that little girls tended to mask a lot of what was going on, and that we've tended to associate ADHD with hyperactive little boys who couldn't sit down. That's not a criticism of boys, but also most testing has always focused on boys, likewise autism. So a lot of the stuff that we're learning now about ADHD in women is there's a lot of women, I know so many who are being diagnosed in later life, and it's not because suddenly these conditions are appearing, it's they were always there, they just weren't spotted. And the reason we're seeing such a spike in neurodivergence now, or more people seeming to be diagnosed, is because society has changed. So in the past, there was a theory that people with ADHD were the ones who actually kept the tribe safe because we couldn't really pay attention. We got bored, and we would be the ones who would either say, right, stop digging that hole, we've got to cut our losses and move, or fuck, there's a tiger, let's go. Great skills for keeping us alive when we're fighting off saber-tooth tigers, not so good if you need to sit in front of a computer. And what's changed in the last 40, 50 years? More screens, more distraction. And if we talk about even neurotypical people, and I hate that word as well, but even people who don't necessarily have one of these conditions, they will regularly, you're distracted. Everyone's distracted. Everyone's drowning and stuff. The constant task switching. That stuff gets massively exacerbated, and people who have these conditions struggle more, so more of them appear. Because as society changes and the context changes, the people who are going to struggle, who might not have in previous times, become more apparent. So the classic parallel will be short people and tall people.
As in?
Well, for example, if you're a short person and all the cupboards have handles down at the bottom, then everybody's fine, right? If society then says, right, you know what, we're going to make cupboards with handles that are higher up here, which is a social decision, the short people struggle. You see what I mean? And so that's what I mean by this, is that's how we need to think about it, is there have always been people who sat at different ends or whose brains were slightly different. And it's just that as the demands that society has created place on that, more of us are becoming exposed. So on your point about this, on healing and struggle, I think there are certain things that make it more challenging because it's part of the system. Now, in terms of how can we make it life easier and heal, well, neurodivergence isn't something we want to heal from, but the mental distress, the anxiety, depression, the self-pleasure, there are always, of course, things that you can do with that. However, where you and I probably are slightly different is that I think that depending on how we define our stories about ourselves, I think when we're older, it's harder to change our stories about ourselves, even if we want to. I think there is quite a lot of stuff that gets baked in, whether we like it or not, that we struggle to change. You're going to come back at me on this. Whereas if you're 8, when you know about this, I think it's very different because you're not made to feel by society, whether you like it or not, that the reason you couldn't pay attention or the reason your handwriting is terrible or the reason you would never lived up to your potential is because you didn't try hard enough.
Yeah.
And so I suppose, yes, hope, great, but I think I'm probably slightly more cynical about it. I see this as something to manage and to do my best with rather than heal, because I don't believe in that. Now tell me why I'm wrong.
I don't tell you why you're wrong, because
yeah, but I can see your face.
No, I disagree with some points or I have different opinions, but who am I to say that you're wrong?
I know we've debated this before.
Yeah, and I think it's an extremely valuable debate because there are so many variables in it, and it needs to be calibrated very carefully. Because on one side,
just eat more kimchi.
What is that?
I should just eat more kimchi.
Kimchi.
Kimchi, it's the whole.
The thing there. Yeah, I understand. Well, perhaps. So on one side, on one extreme, so to say, is this complete giving up any hope and say, well, no, I'm just saying one extreme. I'm pushing it to the extreme. Where I say, okay, giving a hope and it is what it is. There's nothing to do, and you just got to find a way around it. Let's say you lose a limb and say, okay, well, you can't sew it back, or at least technology is not there for now. And you need to find a way around it by having that particular circumstance. And then there's the other one is this perhaps naive, but perhaps not, belief where you say, okay, I can do much more than I had thought or I had imagined was possible. Because maybe there are certain ways, and that could be spiritual, but that could be with psychedelics, or that could be with medicines, or that could be by other means, which is still being discovered these days, especially after that long, many decades from the 60s when it was all complete taboo. So there's this broad spectrum there. And the question is indeed, what is it that I can change? What is it I need to put up with?
Serenity
and
prayer is
and
my
criticism is not the right word. Maybe frustration or maybe what goes against the way I see things is just not to completely give up the hope or the search for a better quality of life, and not to perhaps not to feel as a victim. And even if from the outside, formally speaking, so to say, you were a victim in many ways. And again, not talking about you specifically, but not to give up the agency that you can improve your condition and just kind of lean back and say, well, there's nothing I can do, right? So that's where I'm getting at, where I want to have that desire and search for a better quality of life and not give up the hope.
Sure, and I would, honestly...
Is that actually different from your view?
So where I think I think it's probably not, but where I differ is, you see, we talk about meditation, we talk about medication, therapy, all of those things. I do all of that stuff, and I spend my life trying to work out what it gives meaning, trying to, do the compassion stuff as well. I go to the food kitchen, I do my job. But there are certain things that it's just sometimes it just feels, and we know this actually from sort of longer mental health, the older you get, the more episodes you've had, the more work you have to do just to stand still. And so it's not that I'm
because let's say the building blocks episodes, you said episodes of a story, right? Like that story is longer because there are more episodes,
and also because your system's more worn
your
down.
own narrative about your story.
Well, it's partly that, but it's also neuroplasticity. So, for example, if you've had one episode, most people, if you've had one episode of depression, the chances of a relapse are huge, right? And that's just something that's necessarily going to happen. Now, the depth and the severity of it depends on the individual and also some of the circumstances and others. But the more episodes you have and the older you get, the more strain that puts on your system. And it also rewires your nervous system and your brain because it's the neuroplasticity. So all the stuff about meditation and other things and therapy, that's all great. But a lot of the time, it's almost a bit like running to stand still. So it's not about being anti-hope. It's a little bit about making progress. And this is certainly something that I have felt. And I don't really want, and it's, to be clear, I'm not somebody who's in a constant turmoil, but I have episodes of it. It's more that you crab walk a lot of the time. So when we talk about moving to a better place or whatever, sometimes it's actually recovery and sort of galvanizing and pulling things together again. And so as a result, to then say, yes, I'd love to take it further, but I also think that this is actually part of the experience of a lot of people. And I think we have to separate between dealing with traumatic episodes and also stuff that's really hard in life. Like if people get divorced, of course you're going to be messed up about that. Or if you lose a kid, of course it's going to be horrific, right? But that's a human experience that is horrendous, but it's part of the life experience. There is a natural response that we should have to that, and shouldn't be medicated or medicalized. I do think there are other things, and I also I think a lot of people, where I bristled slightly before is I don't like the word victim because I don't see myself as a victim. I think I'm fragile, but I don't think I'm a victim. I think there's a difference between that. I'm actually one of the feistiest people you would meet, right? Yeah.
That was the other thing I wanted to come back to because the term fragile or weak.
Fragile and weak are not the same thing.
Yeah, I understand because fragile is a certain sensitivity.
Yeah. Which also comes with ADHD.
To being exposed to a hardship or some pressure that can create an episode,
which is sensory as well. So, for example, if you're go on.
But just to finish off the thought, the idea is the internal force, power, energy, strength. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. So the inner strength is the fundamental variable here, because if you cannot find a way to improve that inner strength, then you're always going to be fragile because the forces of life and nature are going to hit you.
Totally.
So it's only that inner strength that you must seek to reinforce in order to cope better and to live a more replenished life.
Or is it strength, or is it just coming to a place of being peaceful? And I don't mean
accepting.
Yeah, but I don't mean accepting as in, this is where we get, because I do a lot of meditation, right? So we're getting right into it. But acceptance doesn't mean putting up with the shit always. Acceptance, I think, is like being accepting of who you are, good limits and faults and all the rest of that, but also being peaceful with the experience and also separating what we can control, what we can't control, the gratitude, all of those things. I think that's totally a fair point. I think that, again, the reason I don't necessarily like the word strength is because, for example, or an agency. And I've read Viktor Frankl, by the way. So, and I'm not comparing myself. But the whole point about your choice of response in a moment. For example, there are plenty of, in my case, when I have an episode of depression, I don't go to bed. I work through it. I force myself to eat properly, even though what I'd really like to do is go and sit with the drunks on Flagey and neck vodka and just eat cake and probably start smoking again. That's what I want to do, and I don't. And so I consider that to be huge strengths. But does that then get me out of after that's over, to get further, then you've got to recover, and then you've got to get back to a place where you're trying to sort of resolve normal life for a while. Yeah. And of course there are changes that get made. Each time you talk to any person who has a mental health ongoing challenge or experience of it, they will always say, what can I take from this that could help? And even every time I have an episode, I'm like, what did I do wrong? Right? And of course, that becomes part of the self-critical story. So in that sense, it's not that I'm not hopeful. It's that I don't want to add to it, because the hopeful or finding the better place, that implies that there is something that I could be doing. And trust me, I've tried a lot of things, except the one thing that you haven't
recommended. That's the other thing, that perhaps there are, and again, without knowing, obviously it's a very private thing of what you've tried or what methods or cures or others approaches you've tried, but there could be something that can get you to a better place with a much better efficacy, much better results than what you've tried so far.
There could. We've discussed this.
Yeah.
We'll
leave it at that. But
yeah, let's leave it.
We'll leave it at that.
Unless you want to tell me about the shaman again. And I'm not anti anything. I'm really open to lots and lots of things, but I also think at a certain point that where I think you and I would draw the line is, I think there's a history in my family, and that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way, but there are we know from the research and all the rest that there are people that are biologically and genetically predisposed, and then there's social factors and there's temperament, and it's always really complicated. And I know that there's a whole language around it now, so that we don't talk about depression, we talk about people having an episode of depression, blah, 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 blah. But I do think that there are, where you and I would differ on this, and I've talked about this also with my psychiatrist, for example, we talk about psychedelics. Some people have amazing experiences with them. If you're taking antidepressants, you can't take psilocybin, for example, and I would not come off that. I would not come off antidepressants to try psilocybin, and I'm perfectly open to it. I am not anti it, but I've also talked to my psychiatrist about it, and I know what the evidence says about it, and I'm not anti it. I think it sounds great, but I'm also not going to compromise on the things that are holding me together. I'm not going to take a risk in that sense.
That's exactly.
But I'm not anti it.
No, that's an extremely important thing, extremely consequential thing. Because I know, I can say by now, many people who are either in similar conditions or they did not have or were not on antidepressants or similar medicine, and they did psychedelics, and it massively improved the quality of their life. But I also know quite a few who are contemplating it and thinking about trying some supervised and properly administered and all those preconditions, safety preconditions, psychedelic. But they are at this point, which they're relatively stable, and having to give it up for that alternative curative method to take effect. First, they will most likely go down because they need to get off their medication for the other one to take effect, which is obviously a huge risk in every sense.
If you are, so I think we also, and this, you've hit on a point here, is I think that if you are and again, this is I think, but it's also based on what I've talked about with my psychiatrist, if you are somebody who's had an ongoing chronic condition where you have to be on, in my case, if I come off antidepressants, it doesn't matter how much therapy I do, how much meditation, how much exercise, it's going to come, I'm going to spiral in 6 months. So And what this, what the research what shows is that for people who have ongoing conditions, they can get an initial boost and then it wears off and they go back to where they were. But for some people where it's less severe, what they've experienced, they might have an amazing time with psychedelic. I don't mean amazing as in having a party, but the psychedelics can lift them. But I think we're talking about different conditions here. I know somebody else who had ketamine therapy to help her with her mental health stuff, and she's in a very good place right now. So again, I'm very open to a lot of this stuff. But what I'm not prepared to do is put anything, as you say, at risk. Yeah, exactly. And that's where it becomes a little bit harder, because if you've spent a lot of time trying to find the things that keep you glued together, it's quite hard to find the resolve to go further than that, because it feels like you've already, these fragments have I shored against my ruins already.
Yeah. At this point, I just want to say two things. One is perhaps a disclaimer. We're not endorsing recreational drugs or anything like that. We're talking about
medical
psychedelics for mental health conditions and issues.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the other thing is that I so much appreciate you talking about this so openly. And I didn't want to leave it to the end, but just to say already, because I don't think this kind of conversation has ever been had in the Brussels EU circles so openly. There are tons of such conversations happening in so many smaller circles and offline, so to say. But I don't think that in an open manner that somebody of your, let's say, visibility opens up about it, specifically about this. So I just want to appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. Well, the reason I started talking about it is also because I got diagnosed 6 months ago with the ADHD and the dyspraxia. If you want to know what dyspraxia is, I'll tell you in a minute.
Yeah.
And I just decided, you know what? I've spent my life feeling crap about myself in a lot of things. Not everything, but a lot of things. Or feeling like if I tried harder and all these stories you've internalized. And so then I thought, if I'm feeling like this, then how are other people feeling? And also one of the reasons I started talking about it is because that sort of people say stuff like, you seem really together and you're really articulate and you run your own business and it looks like, and you're so sort of self-assured and you're quite assertive.
You got your shit together. Excuse my French.
Yeah. You've got your shit together. And then I was just like, you've got no idea. And so the reason I decided to be so open about it is because the gap between what is experienced and the gap between what is experienced and perceived is so vast in a lot of cases. And also because I'm not ashamed of any of this stuff, right? I'm just, if the mental health stuff has come from being as a response to being neurodivergent, then fine, great. I like the fact that my brain is different. I don't think it's better or it's worse, but I'm still getting to know it. And I think that also ties into your point about getting to a better place, because at the moment, I'm trying to rework my business to make it more neurodivergent friendly. But it's doing my head in, and I am absolutely hating it. And I think we should change the topic and talk about how you survive with multiple businesses and being an entrepreneur, because I'm trying to do one, and I'm absolutely hating revamping it. Everybody thinks that running your own business is like this great ride, and I've got motion sickness the whole time.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is good team. And a good team, it's not
but you've got a prefrontal cortex. I don't have one, so I don't know how to outsource. There you go.
Yeah, I think it takes time to find a good team. A bit of luck, or more than a bit. And perhaps experience where you understand what sort of skill set you're looking for.
And you're comfortable delegating.
Yeah.
Do you see, in my case, and again, this links it back to the stories we tell, because I grew up with this whole, if you only wrote neater, or you sat and you paid attention and your essays were better, if you just tried a bit harder, you should be able to do this, like with your accounts or with these documents, or the EPSO exams, which we can talk about in a moment as well. If you just tried a bit harder, you'd be able to do it. And so I think there's part of me that at some level is still that, if we're going to deal with the therapy speak, is the sort of frightened child. It's like, I need to prove that I can do it. I should be able to do it. Whereas, so the idea of delegating it somehow feels like I should be able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to usually deeper things about control and trust and similar things.
And having a prefrontal cortex.
Presumably,
but that's the thing that's the reason people with ADHD, you obviously know about the 3 bits of the brain. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's the lizard brain, which then you've got the limbic, and then you've got the prefrontal cortex, which came later. The prefrontal cortex, which is obviously the bit that deals with executive function, planning.
Yeah. Everything cognitive. Yeah.
Basically, but the stuff that came later, that's much more of the sort of left brain, if that's how the cliched way of dealing with things. The EPSO stuff, that came.
So EU careers for those beyond the bubble.
That came later. But also in people who are neurodivergent, particularly with ADHD, is that the prefrontal cortex, the bit that's to do with planning and execution and decision making, is less developed in a lot of cases. So basically, we are the people who are good at running from tigers as a result.
Yeah, because you're, dare I say, hijacked from time to time.
Yes, massively hijacked. So that's what I meant. Is in it. So when we talk about the prefrontal cortex, I'm teasing. Obviously, I've got one, I think, but things that would seem straightforward, like writing a list of what needs to be done and going, okay, this is what that person, or strategy, for example, saying that's there, this is the steps that we need to take. That's harder for a lot of people with ADHD. There are strengths to it as well, but it's one of the reasons why the impulse control is sometimes not so developed.
I was going to say that word, but I was waiting for you to say that.
I don't mind. My husband finds it hilarious. He's like, yeah, you're just there for running away from tigers.
So one thing I wanted to come back to, which might be a point of confusion or misunderstanding, is kind of delineating born, let's say, what is the word, genetic or acquired neurodivergence, though I don't even know if that can be acquired, or probably that's
no, you can't acquire neurodivergence.
Right, I would guess that that's a genetic condition.
Just because somebody's just because somebody's born neurodivergent, so they're autistic, or they have bipolar, well, not bipolar, that's a mental health condition, or they have ADHD or dyspraxia or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to have a mental health condition, right? Because it's not a mental health.
So it's a predisposition.
It's a condition, right? It's not to do with the mental health.
It can be activated or not.
It can be activated, well, yes, but it's also not mental health. It's to do with how you're wired. So it's more to do with the wiring.
Exactly.
The people who have anxiety and depression or other have mental health disorders, that is a separate thing. But people who are neurodivergent, especially if they've not been diagnosed, often have anxiety or depression.
Much more prone to it.
Much more prone to it, and they've experienced it. And we don't know if it's chicken or egg or what. But the point is, there is a higher tendency to that. But not all people who experience anxiety and depressed are like that. Now, in terms of what we were going to talk about, when it comes to things like anxiety and depression or life experiences, the way I delineate this is there's three ways I think about it, which isn't necessarily the medical way. The first thing is everybody has rough patches in life, right? Nobody gets through life unscathed. So all the wear and tear of life is quite traumatic in a small t sense. Divorce, bereavement, marriage, we're all going to lose people. In the West, we're really not that comfortable with it. The Buddhists do it much better. I think we're starting to talk about it more, but we're still very, very uncomfortable with it. But life is messy and painful. Secondly, there is specific trauma related mental health, so PTSD or other episodes. So, for example, if you're blown up if you're in a bomb attack, or that you've had ongoing sexual abuse, or there's something that is going to be specific trauma. And then I consider in the third category around mental health, there are people who are born with a neurological disposition, whether it's bipolar or they have got more genetic, there's a family history of depression or anxiety. Or perhaps in some cases, maybe they are neurodivergent as well. They are going to be people who do develop mental health conditions throughout their life, and those are going to be the ones who struggle with them in an ongoing sense. And by struggle, I don't mean be defeated by. It's just that they really have to manage it and to learn to live with it. And that is where I think we take a different... That's where we need to delineate.
I just want to say in that context that, so those who are born with a certain predisposition, that part you cannot change. No. So I don't claim for a second that could be rewired in a neurological or other sense. Where I do believe significant improvement can be had are the sort of other two parts as to addressing those highly adverse effects that you went through or were exposed to, and certainly the other, for lack of a better word, challenges that have such an impact on your mental health. If I take the analogy, everything that's not hardware can be improved.
Yeah, well, we know a lot
let
about
alone healed.
And neuroplasticity is an amazing thing, but it does require work and time and willingness, and also a huge amount of self-awareness. So I think that a lot of the time is that people, if you're thinking a certain way because of a story you tell about yourself, because you've struggled with certain things, or because you're reliving trauma that you've had, you've got to put that work in. And that work often requires resources that not everybody has, and time, and also the not just insight, but the willingness to do that work. And not everybody is that able to be that honest with themselves.
That makes me think how interesting that you, as a communication trainer, you certainly talk about not just messaging, but framing, and framing towards the outside world, but certainly framing towards yourself. So how do you put together your different life episodes and what you learn about yourself? You mentioned that you were diagnosed a couple of months ago.
About a year ago now.
About a year ago. So that is certainly was a new information to you, at least at the minimum to confirm something that you may have already known, or maybe a new piece of information. And that certainly had, with all the other elements and components of your story, you frame yourself, your own personal narrative in a different way.
I'm still making sense of it. So when I first got diagnosed, and actually, to be honest, on the dyspraxia, which we haven't talked about before, that's just for me, that's how information goes into the brain and how you see so in my case, I have fine motor visual skills issues. So my hand-eye coordination is terrible. And I have terrible handwriting. I can't do things like decorate cakes, all that kind of stuff. And I also struggle with visual information, which is one of the reasons why those EPSO tests kill me. Spatial awareness, parking, all that stuff. I went to get tested primarily for that, and then that had been more damaging, and then I got the ADHD. And I was initially very sad because I was like, if I'd known this when I was younger, maybe I wouldn't have beaten myself up into such a pulp, and I'd have done things a bit differently. And then I went through the other side, and I was like, fuck it. I got ADHD, that's brilliant. Now if you're boring, it's not my fault. And I can actually stand up and go, you're boring, get out, you got to keep me focused.
So did it give you a wild card to...
Yeah, I'm like, this is boring. This is great. I don't have to stay focused on this. There's a reason why this is driving me nuts. It's not because I won't do it. It's because I actually can't do it. And then on the dyspraxia, if I can't open a jar, I just go to my husband, you do it. I'm done.
Let me be provocative. Doesn't it give you a get out of jail card where you say even other stuff that if you hadn't known that particular diagnosis or that particular condition, you'd say, okay, I'm struggling with, but I can do it. So does it lead to an attitude where you give up easier because you know you have
Not
that
now.
particular condition?
Well, no, because I was diagnosed at 46, so I spent a lot of my life trying to do it. And I was a straight A student, and I went to Cambridge University, and I have a degree in classical Greek and Latin literature, and I worked at the BBC. So on paper, I would look like I was fine, but I was still on fire internally, not getting stuff done. Now, in answer to what you were saying before, I don't give myself a get out of jail now. I'm kinder to myself, but I also say things to my husband, like if I'm cooking, don't stand next to me and go through all the tasks that I need to get done, because I will literally turn around and bite your head off. Because if you distract somebody
you won't hear it.
I won't hear it, but also if you distract somebody with ADHD when they're focusing on doing something else, interrupting them when they're focusing, we're not good with task switching. We're very easily overwhelmed. We get angry. So it's not that I give myself a get out of jail. It's like, this is not, and it's a bit bumpy. We're learning how to
Then it's a manual.
Well, I know how to deal with it. It helps
Sort
to
of a manual to
explain
you.
certain things, but it's still pretty new in. So I wouldn't say I've completely reconciled it all. But I do think certainly in our household, my husband is relieved that the reason I've been ignoring certain things or not paying attention to them is because I literally haven't seen it. Or it's not because I'll walk past things and like, can you take those books out? And I'll like, what books? And they've been there for months and I just won't have seen them because of the way in which the sensory stuff or whatever is coming in. So it doesn't give you a get out of jail, but it does help explain a lot of things. But I don't want to be someone who makes excuses. I want to know how to manage it better so that I can make my life and my people I love's lives less chaotic. That's how I see it. That is the hope. Yeah.
Makes sense. Just going back to this of running a
company. Tell me more.
Company. We're not here to talk about the way I handle things, but
I think we should.
Well, okay.
I want to know how you
next
handle
time we switch seats and you'll be the reporter that you used to be, and I'll answer all your questions. But what I was going to say is, adapt to it, or maybe running a business as the CEO or as the number one person in it is not the right position or not the right thing for you. Because you're a creative mind, you are a great executor, someone who does all those things which make the business, the content of the business essential. But maybe you need a kind of a COO, meaning a chief operating officer, someone who just takes care of the accounting, which probably drive you nuts, take care of all the, booking a flight if you need to go somewhere, or discussing with the client whether you need to wear a blue shirt or a green shirt. So all those things which are totally not your kind of thing, try to give it to someone.
Well, I've given a lot of stuff
for whom
already.
That's okay.
I make it sound. So here's the thing. I consider you to be an entrepreneur. And I mean that as a compliment, right?
Thank you.
I do not consider myself to be entrepreneurial. and I'm trying to learn how to do it in my mid-40s. So I haven't even told people what I do. So I run my own company, listeners, in which I do...
1 hour in. Okay.
Exactly. Now 1 hour in. Oh, yeah. Whoops. Now advertise the business. I run a media public speaking sort of narrative training agency. So it's mostly oral communication skills and with a strong emphasis on the structure and messaging component. And I hate the S word, but yes, there is some storytelling in there, but I don't like that word. And I'm good at the content and I like it a lot. And I like being present with people. I also think that's part of the, when we talk about what gives meaning, I like being in the room. I like teaching. I like that dynamic. And I also think especially in the AI era, we're going to need more of those shared moments. But I don't consider myself to be an entrepreneur. And I like people who can think. I admire people who can think like that, because basically what I have found is that over the last 15 years, I've worked with some amazing people. Like I've worked with prime ministers, I've worked with chief executives, I've worked with European commissioners.
It's on your LinkedIn, right? Like
yeah,
media coach to prime ministers.
I have done it. I'm not making it up. But I've worked with lots of different people and I've been very lucky and I've had lots of great people who've given me work and I'm very grateful for that and I've been exposed to that. But I've never actually entrepreneured the business. So it was word of mouth, or I wrote a couple of things on LinkedIn, but I've never done any meaningful marketing strategy. I've never just gone and go, okay, what's my unicorn client? And I got to a point where, especially after getting diagnosed, when I realized I was burning out so much because I was so tired, because you've run training. It's exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do it 4 days a week?
4 days a week? I don't think so.
I used to. And you're on.
You can do it for 1 week or something, but on a regular basis, that's a killer.
I just got to a point where I was like, I have to find a way to change this up, because either I need to put my prices up, clearly, but also I need to find a way that if I'm not going to hire people because their people hire me, then you need to scale it. And that's where I'm interested in entrepreneurs, because I think entrepreneurs understand, even if it's a one-person business and they're the brand, they know how to kind of, they entrepreneur themselves.
Well, let me ask you a cheeky question. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur?
I don't, but I want to be less burnt out. I want to grow the business a bit more. I would like to actually see what happens if I did try and take what I consider to be a more structured approach to it. I think there's a challenge in there too. And I would also I'd like to work in a slightly different way. So, for example, if you train 4 days a week, you're saying the same stuff a lot. You're on your feet a lot. You're talking a lot. It's the same presentation.
You're laughing at your own jokes.
Well, I always laugh at my own jokes anyway. But yes, you're doing all of that. But the point is, it's
348th time.
It's completely performance-based. You say the same things, but also you see the same problems, right? And also, I think that you've probably experienced this too. If you do a lot of training in one go, by the end of the week, you're kind of fried. And I got to a point where I was like, am I shortchanging some of my clients? Not because I'm not giving them good training, but because I'm so tired that I actually can't give what I would like to do is the precision and the focus.
Sorry for my laughter, because I'm reminded that back in the socialist times, back in Hungary, there was this running joke where you had to buy a car that was fabricated on Monday, not on Monday, because that was still a weekend hangover for the factory workers. So usually Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday was okay, and Friday they were already stoned because the weekend is coming. So what I'm saying is, you don't want to be the trainer who the client should be lucky if they get me on a Tuesday.
Exactly. I didn't want to be that person. And also the thing is, I wasn't really that person because I would always bring the energy. But the cost that would come with in terms of the exhaustion, and I've got a preteen child. I mean, I need to be emotionally, and I want to be emotionally available.
Good luck for that.
I know, but if we're going to fight about stupid things, then at least I'd like to not be completely...
Look, it's easy. He's going to just slam the door in your face and kicks you out of his room.
Well, we watched a film with Ryan Reynolds recently where he was talking... I can't remember what happened. Have you seen it? It's called The Adam Project.
Rings a bell.
Okay, so basically Ryan Reynolds is like some, I don't know, aviator from the future, and it's about time travel, and he comes back and he visits his childhood self who was being bullied at school, and the dad died a year before, and he's being a dick to his mum. The kid's 12. And there's a scene where the Ryan Reynolds character is sitting in a bar and his mother comes in. And so they start talking, but she's got no idea who he is. And she's talking about the challenges that she's having with her son, and that, he's, even though the dad has died, and he said, oh, don't worry about it. Teenage boys are horrible. It's like being yelled at by your urinal cake for 7 years. And I was like, yeah, kind of. But at least if I'm going to get yelled at, I want to feel like if it's going to be difficult, which I accept that bringing up teens is, I would like to not be deep fried but already. If we're going to go into arm-to-arm combat in the evening, I'd like to have a bit more energy. I need to give myself a fair chance.
Yeah. You put your shields on.
Yes,
no
exactly.
pun intended.
My stage name. Go on.
No pun intended. So what I was going to just come back to for a second is the entrepreneur part.
Okay.
Why not be the freelancer, the gun for hire, that whoever, large company, small company, but they do everything and you do the art.
Well, that's fine, but then I need to have an infrastructure around it, no? Well, hang on. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're referring to.
Let's say there's a training company,
No.
and we know a couple of people who do that kind of thing, or large structures or organizations. And whenever somebody needs you, you bring your talent, you bring your art, but you don't need to deal with anything beyond that.
Well, so two things. I think I'm unemployable. Oh, you mean, but I do an influence? I've done that for people. I don't like that. That makes me a gun
not as an
for
employee,
hire.
but as again, gun for hire, a trainer, consultant who can be
Because I want to call the shots.
who can be assigned a gig.
So the reason I started working for myself, and I make it sound like I fell into it, which is true, but I've always been quite bloody minded, and I think that's what I like about this, is that I want to do it my way, right? And I think that's part of actually having come, the flip side. I mean, we talked about
I was waiting for the word freedom.
Yeah, the freedom. So all of these things, I know I sound like talking about mental health and ADHD. The things I like the freedom. I like the fact that if I want to do 2 hours on a training and then nothing for the rest of the day, well, I don't like doing nothing for the rest of the day because that makes me feel bad, but that is quite a neurodivergent way of working. I mean, I had one client where we did 8 to 10 in the morning and I trained their CEO online and I completely knocked him into shape for his interview. And then I basically spent the rest of the day looking at YouTube. Do you know, and then I was like, how do you reconcile this? But I'd like to spend a little less time on YouTube. So why don't I do it for somebody else? Because I like the freedom. I want to charge what I want to charge. And a lot of the time if you're working for somebody else, they cap you. And I'm like, well, I'll be damned with that. I've been doing it for 15 years. If you want me, you should pay for me. And because I have my own way of doing it.
You know what you might need? I just found the word, an agent.
No, I don't need that's a bit grand. Do you want to be my agent? Add that to your list. I see you've got your 7. I didn't know which company I was coming to when I turned up. I've got so many of them.
Not all of them are mine.
No, I don't want an agent. Like that's. So I think maybe we're disagreeing over what entrepreneur means. What does it mean to you?
Entrepreneur, the way I define it, I usually distinguish from freelancer versus entrepreneur. And the freelancer is basically you're selling your time to clients. So whatever that time includes, be that media training or web programming or what have you. Whereas an entrepreneur, at least in my mind, creates a business, so creates a structure. So I would make a distinction between freelancer and entrepreneur.
Yes, so would I, and I don't consider myself
and freelancer sells their time to provide services, be that media training or consultancy or anything else. Whereas an entrepreneur creates a business, some structure, and a person can be an entrepreneur in their own business. But it reminds me of the book, The E-Myth. And that book had a great impact on me because 15 years ago, as I was starting to build my e-learning business.
A vast empire.
I wouldn't call it that, but something that nicely took off. So as I was creating that, and it was really like a moonlighting project, a garage project, if you will. And let's say, client emails coming in, and we're at a vacation with my wife, no kids yet at the time, and it's like 2 a.m. and I'm answering client emails or customer emails. And let's say proofreading or checking some tests or question items which were allegedly wrong or there was some mistake. So that was horrible. And rightfully so, she was very, very upset at that. And somehow I came across this book, The E-Myth, which essentially, there's just one line. I mean, it's a beautiful storytelling and very well explained everything. But the most important concept there is working in the business and working on the business. And the minute I understood that there's a distinction to be made, I said, damn, that makes sense.
So here's the yes, I think that makes complete sense. So how I would say is I do have a company, it's called Red Thread. And there is a structure and there is a way of doing things and there's a brand and there's an identity. But what there isn't is that kind of drive to push it forward because I've always been a one-woman company. And the reason I decided I needed to change it up, which is what I'm doing it now, is because there's only one of me. So that I'm limited. I don't want to have other trainers working for me per se. I mean, I will happily bring other people in, but that's not where I see it. So then what do you do? Well, then you have to, you can digitize your knowledge. So I'm doing my e-learning at the moment. And, this is what we're filming here in a couple of weeks. And the idea is that how do you then I would like, when I talk about entrepreneuring it, it's actually what is the strategic direction? Where do I want to take it? And how can I make that work as a product? Because otherwise you are giving your time. And it's like I'm 46 now, and I can tell you I've got less energy than I did when I was 30. I love what I do, but it takes everything out of me. And I don't want to be doing this until I'm 75.
Well, that's the other
because
part.
I can't. So that's my point is that why do I want to entrepreneur it? Because I think actually I can sell my time. I know I've got no problems with that. Selling my time is not a problem. I can make a very good living, but I'll be burnt out.
It's not scalable.
And it's not scalable. And if I don't work, I don't make money.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I was just going to interject where product. So there's this horrible turning that into a verb, productize something. I'd rather just say turn it into a product, seeing your reaction as a native speaker. But really where your knowledge, your expertise, and everything that you are basically teaching over and over, slightly adapted in different ways, but there's this core knowledge and wisdom that you've gained, you turn that into something that is entirely scalable because it's digital.
Yeah.
It's not the same, for sure, because people will still want to have you in person.
Yeah, but then they can pay me
and all
loads
that.
more
But
money
exactly.
for it.
You do basically a pyramid, a value pyramid, where you're really the crown jewel on the pyramid, which is your personal presence and time.
That's what you said. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur at this point? Is because it's about how do I actually, and I've always been a bit reluctant to do this, and I think it's probably linked to the stuff that we've talked about previously, but I've always been, even though I'm a one-woman company, I've always been uncomfortable with the idea of the brand, like me as the product. I think a lot of people are. I don't think that's an unusual thing, but I've always been uncomfortable with it. Like, I don't really have any, all the stuff, I should have been recording videos ages ago. I mean, for crying out loud, I'm a media trainer, I'm a communications company. I'd have not wanted to do that. I don't have a podcast, right? Not that I think I should have one, but my point is I haven't done a lot of that stuff because I've been reluctant to do it, and I don't do it for marketing, and I find it discomforting, and I've always been a bit uncomfortable with brand law. But now I've got to this point where it's like, well, either you change something up because you are going to burn out, but also because actually you want to scale it, you want to bring it to more people, and there are different ways of doing this. And I think also we can get really set in our ways, and if you're just selling your time, I don't want to just do the same thing. I mean, I have changed things up, obviously, in the last 15 years, but there are other ways to do stuff. And it also takes you, if it's digital, you get different markets. One of the things I loved about COVID was that I had clients in like Nigeria and, all over the world. Yeah. Whereas previously my reach, yes, I'd traveled, but I don't want to so much because of climate change, and you can't be in all sorts of places. But I'd be on calls with people in like 3 different time zones. It's fantastic. I loved that.
Yeah. And when we look at a little bit just transiting to what actually you teach. So
Yes.
you train people in being moderators, or you yourself do moderation, right?
I don't.
Oh.
I don't moderate.
You used to?
I did, and I got bored of that and decided
Okay.
I didn't want it on my tombstone. So I quit that.
Okay.
And
So your tombstone is going to say former moderator.
yeah, exactly. That's what I want. That's I've sometime in life, it's a gun for hire moderator. There's nothing wrong with it. I never set out to offer it. It's just that I had a client who wanted somebody to do it, and I did it because I was the next journalist at the time.
I was young and I needed the money.
Well, I know, but I just kind of stayed with it, and then it got to a point where I was just like, I'm not enjoying this anymore, and I don't want the exposure. And I know there's loads of people who love moderating, and they do want the exposure. I don't care. Like, that's the thing, is I care way more about my reputation than I do about visibility and exposure. Like, to me, what matters more is, did people think that they had a good experience? Now, you asked me what do I do. I do what? Go
No,
on.
I was just going to say, but that's exactly what probably made you a very good moderator. And I recall a couple of months ago, I was at an event, and the moderator thought that he's the star of the show. Not that I was the star of the show or anyone else, but a moderator. Well, depending, an MC is different from a moderator.
Yeah, I never MC, and and as soon as somebody says that we're looking for a sort of MC to come in and make a few jokes, I'm like, no.
Yeah, that's a stand-up comedy, but not comedy, but
not
kind of
good.
a stand-up show. But
Yeah.
moderator, a good moderator, kind of blends in, yet leads, yet.
Do you do it?
No.
I mean, look, it's fine. I've got nothing against it. It's just that when I was thinking, I made some decisions like, what do I actually enjoy? What do I want to give my time to? What do I actually like? And the things that I do, like the core offer, it's what I said at the beginning. I teach people how to talk to journalists, which doesn't mean teaching them how to lie. Actually, in most cases, it means teaching them how to be clearer and interesting, because most people are really boring unless you give them the tools and the practice to put it in a form that a journalist can use. I teach people public speaking, so that's with slides, but it's also just sort of presentations and panels. And I teach people how to create narrative and messaging, most of which is for oral delivery. And typically what I'll do is I'll go in and we do a mixture of very practical exercises. So it can be the little pitches, but some of it's practice interviews, or it can be longer talks. And then there's loads of theory and tips woven in. And it's very, very practical, but I also do give them the stuff that they need to know as well. And what I like about it is that you can get most people, if they want to improve, you can get them to do it.
Yeah.
And I also like seeing them develop their own judgment about what works and what doesn't. And also, I think one of the things that I'm good at, and I will say this in my favor, is I'm very good at very quickly listening to somebody and going, okay, that's the bit that's interesting, that's not, take that out, junk the rest. That is a skill that I have, which I will quite happily own. And likewise, and this is where I want to start talking to you about AI. I was doing some work with for people who had to tell some stories on camera. And these were not people who were natural communicators. They were doing it as a kind of recruitment campaign for the organization they worked for. And it was messy, and we pulled it out, and it was all the stuff that they thought they should say versus the stuff that was interesting. And then we got it. And it was really, and that shiver that everybody in the room gets when that line works. And I thought, this is such a human, messy, kind of joyful, and I don't say joyful very lightly, exchange. And it's what we've always done. And it's like when I ask AI to help me out with stuff, I know you're the wizard on prompting, but this is one of the things that I would like to get your views on. I think there's so many fantastic things you can use it for. At the same time, I think it's going to be a depressing world that we live in when AI can fake the gut punch that humans get. So somebody's preparing their speaking points and AI says, yes, if you do that, humans will react like this, and it will get to that point. I think that's so reductive.
Yeah.
Respond.
Well, there's a lot there.
Welcome to my TED Talk.
Very good. No, there's so many facets that so many threads I want to unpack or pick up on. Okay, let's start before we get to the AI because that merits sufficient attention, but we put it aside. Are you ruthless in your feedback?
I can be. I am not. What do you mean by ruthless? Am
Harsh.
I mean? No, I'm not harsh.
But very brutally honest.
No, I'm not brutal. I mean, I have been in the past. I have phases where I go in and out of it, and it depends on how I feel. Like I got told I was too nice a couple of weeks ago, but that was because it was my judgment.
Were you unhappy with that feedback?
Yeah, I didn't like it because I was anxious, but also because I was in an anxious place at the time, so it made me doubt whether I'd read the room wrong. Right?
So you were afraid that you were going to overshoot. So
No.
you undershoot.
No, it wasn't that. It was that I had a lot of people who it wasn't they were being asked to do something that wasn't their normal job. Okay. And they were required to come in, and they're all very smart. You know, these are people, some of them introvert, policy people, engineers, those sorts of things. They're being asked to do something that wasn't their day-to-day job, that they didn't have to do.
So you felt that it wouldn't be fair to...
I didn't think it would be fair. Yeah. And also because they needed to record something. And so I felt that in that instance, they needed their confidence built and they needed some tools, but they didn't need to be waterboarded, if that's what you mean. If it's me and a CEO on our own, I will tell them exactly what's going on a lot of the time. Most people I find that they don't need brutal feedback. What they need is tools and encouragement. Like I very rarely encounter somebody who is arrogant and boring, right? And if they're boring, usually you just kind of cut through it. And I wouldn't say that to them anyway, because I think it's really unhelpful. So it's always action focused. So this is one of the things that people aren't very effective. Like I was working with a young woman this morning, and she said somebody had told her that she was too serious when she spoke. Okay. And I said, did they tell you what you could do about that? And she said, no. And I said, well, I would ignore that then. So next time somebody gives you that advice, they're like, you're too serious, or you're too girly, or you're too technical.
That's judgment.
Ask them,
it's not constructive feedback.
Ask them what you could do about it. And if they can't give you practical recommendations like make your, use a 3-point structure, or give an example, or speak a bit slower, or go back through this and write down all the jargon terms that are a problem. Yeah. If they can't give it to you at that level, then ignore them, because it's going to be unhelpful and you're going to carry it with you and you'll think it defines you, and it doesn't. So does that answer your question? I'm not brutal. I'm honest, but I'm fair.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into fights with people. Yeah. And I don't want to upset people. I think putting yourself in a situation where you're doing something in a second or third language,
I can completely
doesn't help.
See or imagine that your clients love you for that, because most people appreciate honest feedback. In my EPSO business over at EU Careers, we have a trainer who comes from a cultural background where very harsh feedback is the norm.
Well, this woman who told me I was too soft, I think, came from a harsh feedback culture
too.
Yeah,
so there's a huge cultural element. But I was many times not afraid, but I was wary whether he would get feedback from clients that he was coaching and training to say, well, his feedback is too harsh or too in your face. And I don't recall any of such thing happening in the past many years that we've been working together.
Yeah.
So the clients, they just appreciate honest, fair, accurate feedback. Obviously, you need to package it in the right form, and you need to be smart enough not to judge the person, but focus on the performance.
Right. So that's exactly, yes, I do. So I'm not brutal, but I will say, right, I think there's I'll say there's too much stuff in here. For example, there's too much stuff in here. There's a lot of information and there's no communication. And I think that this part was underwhelming and nobody really is going to care about that. I think you need to develop this bit more. I think you should move this bit up, right? And then, so it's very kind of the criticism, if that's the right word, is only ever like, I think we need to change this, or you're using too much jargon at this point and it's getting in the way, or you're running over your sentences. So again, it comes back to this point about its behavior.
Yeah.
It's not you.
Not you. You're not like, you're a person who doesn't understand how to do it. Well, no.
Or somebody else said that a CEO, in fact, who I was media training, he said he'd been told in a previous life, in a different job, in a different training, that he didn't come across as very likable. I mean, and it's true, there are some people who just aren't likable, right? You can't fake it, but he is likable, actually. But I was like, what are you meant to do with that?
Yeah.
As in, so, and maybe I'm at a point now, because I can read a room quite well and I'm quite sensitive to that. I can tell whether or not it's fair to, if someone's going to be able to take it, the psychology of it. So even if somebody probably does deserve something slightly more brutal, often I will pull the punch if there's more of their colleagues there as well. Like, it's a subtle thing.
Yeah. And it's, you really need to see on the other person, and pretty quickly, most often, because, well, if it's a long-term client, that's different. But in a group training session, you gotta feel whether that person, is there something that the person really needs to hear that you want to deliver?
I've had stand-up rows with clients too. Well, not clients, I've had with trainees, and quite often those are the ones who are arrogant and they don't want to take it and they think they know best. And the classic one is that they don't like journalists and they think that journalists are out to get them, and then they talk very patronizingly and pompously at these the journalist, and they sort of pick fights, and then they get themselves into trouble, and then you explain to them why what they said would not be thanked. If people in the US or wherever HQ saw this quote in the FT, they wouldn't be very happy. And they don't, a lot of the time they don't take it. And then you do have to get to a bit of a back and forth. Yeah. And it can get a bit ugly, but it's not in a personal way. It's just that if you do this, it's your choice, but this is what it's going to look like.
And maybe just to come back for a second on the point of arrogance, because, and that will also lead us to the AI bit of, if somebody thinks that they figured it out already and they know everything that needs to be known, or they're in your workshop or in your training, not out of their own will, but they were sent there, and there comes this British-American former journalist, and we hate journalists and we distrust the media, and who are you to tell me what I'm supposed to know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. So a lot of the time, this is why, as in most people, you've done this, you've trained a lot of scientists, a lot of technical people. Most people that I have trained are lovely, right? I mean, there are a few jerks, but I can count them. In the 15 years I've been doing it, that it's on less than 5 fingers, right? Most of them are lovely. Most of them don't have a clue. They are aware that, and they have their own insecurities about it. So, for example, I trained some quantum scientists recently. If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. But the point is, I'd recently trained some of them, and that was really putting me up against. That was a real challenge, right? And it was one of those slightly scary ones where 3/4 of the way through, I was like, fuck. Where
explain it to me like a 5-year-old, like I'm a 5-year-old.
But also just that everything that I was trying to tee up all the tricks that I was trying, it just was one of them. It just wasn't quite getting there. We got it in the end. But what I'm trying to say on this is that there's a whole package that comes with a lot of people who are very knowledgeable, which is the passion for what they do. Like, they're so wedded to one specific bit of what they've discovered, or they're so worried about what their scientific peers might say. And so they bring
especially if they dumb down their message by oversimplifying it, losing accuracy, etc.
And if they are basically told that they have to strip down all the ways in which they have previously communicated, which is, the scientist, the build-up point, all of this, and the culture maps. So all of these things, they come into that and they get told by someone, right, you've got to do it like this. Now you're going to try it, you're going to get it wrong. and then we're going to give you the tips, and then you're going to have to do it again. And you're going to be working against your comfort zone through the whole thing. You're going to get embarrassed. You're going to make mistakes. And then if you add in on top of that, well, that was quite boring, wasn't it?
So there comes the messaging part. So how can you advise clients or these people to just come up with better messaging and the S word which you hate, storytelling? Why do you hate it?
Because I think it's overused, and I think people describe it. It's when you see people who describe, they'll say, I'm a storyteller. Unless you work in theatre or you're actually a writer, I think it's an abused term, actually.
Right.
And I also think that it's self-aggrandizing in a lot of cases. And I also, if I add my third point on that, is that I think it can encourage, like the word journey, which I can't stand either. Everyone's on a journey. It's like, for Christ's sake, I am not on in your company's cybersecurity onboarding journey.
In Brussels, everybody's on a mission.
Fucking hell.
I mean, not here. When they travel, that's a mission.
I'm training
right?
my chat GPT, whatever it is at the moment, and I have said, in my instructions, it says Laura never uses the word journey. And Laura, it's never.
I actually have my custom settings as well. Never use the word delve into.
Okay, I have no journeys, and I said like and then it also keeps saying things like let's be honest here, or here's the deal. It's like I would never say that. Take this out. And it's like right, and it gets really enthusiastic. Goes, that's right, you would never say that. And I was like, yes, no, I wouldn't. So the things like journeys and storytelling, I think they encourage a certain level of self-involvement and self-importance that I dislike intensely, which is my British side, I think. And I think that you can do all of these things without having to name yourself. I think it's for other people to name you. Do you see what I mean? As in, it's like when people say I'm a visionary or I don't know, whatever. I think there's just something about it. I think unless you actually are a
It also gets at me in LinkedIn profiles or similar ways where
I don't understand
leader or best in class or something.
I don't understand. I mean, somebody had a cybersecurity sentinel on their profile. I was like, I will not be befriending you because I don't know what you do. And this sounds really self-aggrandizing. So I think it's that. I think it's that it encourages people to sort of label themselves. And I think if people need to do this about themselves, then that automatically makes me a bit suspicious because I think just tell people how you're going to help them. That's more important than the label that you put on yourself.
And going back to messaging.
Yes.
So what is some immediate practical piece of advice you would give future messengers?
Whew. Well, what's the context? Okay, so if you're a company, most people, they always start trying to sell their product without any context. So for example, everybody company is really keen to sell their solution, but they don't talk enough about the problem that it fixes or the setup that leads to there. So they don't spend enough time doing that. So they don't create a clear narrative structure. Most scientists also quite often just start writing the details. So everyone, and the way I would say it to them is, rather than there's too much detail here, I'll say, I think people will struggle to understand this unless we have this explanatory sentence at the beginning that tees it up. And then they'll try and go to the detail.
Tease it up. I heard an American expression.
Tea, as in golf tea.
I know, but that's an American expression. That's not a British.
Well, I can't help my genes. So there's always a bit of that. And then I'll give people a very religious structure. So for example, right, here's your opening sentence or whatever it is. And then here is how you're going to structure it. So it's going to be, I don't know, what is the context? Or if we're talking about cancer treatment, why has cancer treatment historically been such a problem? Well, it's because patients get sick in the process. What are we doing that is different here? And then what is the future of medicine in this area? And then so you can structure it in a number of different ways. So I think the advice that I would give them is, what is the structure here? What is the narrative structure that you're going to follow? And that the opening set, you have to queue up the problem, or you have to have some kind of phrase that's just going to give the big picture first. Sorry, that's very long-winded. I mean, there's loads of other tips.
Yeah. Because
what do you give them? What advice do you give them?
Well, I want to translate a little bit to the AI to answer this very question. Because increasingly, if I take the power and the capabilities of tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, whatever, it's incredible that they kind of have that knowledge, or at the minimum you can feed that in, but they pick it up already from best practices and different ways of doing this. So until now meaning before the AI really became mainstream and directly accessible for everyday consumers like us. So when I train, say, scientists for science communication or anyone with a technical background or lobbyists or NGOs, whoever, to talk to the institutions or vice versa, talk about European policies, which are boring and dry and complex and long. which is not exactly great communication per se. So feed that into a magic machine, and that churns out in the other side a message that resonates. And you're teaching these methods, which they don't necessarily have the quick capacity to understand. Well, they understand it, but to apply on a specific technical message. And now with AI, it's become possible. So you can feed that into this magic machine. On one end, the ingredients, meaning here's my technical message about cancer or about heat pumps or what have you. And here's the method that I want you to apply. Storytelling best practices, made to stick model, what have you. And say, come up with something that it nicely blends this and provides me with a good message.
And then how do they use that?
Now, that's exactly the tricky part, because that's where a personal, say, capacity building is necessary. But at least they're not going to need to, not that they did, but they wouldn't need to hire a consultant or someone else to do that for them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's something to talk about, of what that means for the business or for that kind of thing. But at the very end, it's still them who need to go to that meeting, go to that event, and deliver it.
Well, this is the thing. So my online offering is going to be called Own Your Moment, because it's this whole point is that you, as we are more in the AI age and people can get more and more stuff from information, it's like if somebody speaks on a podcast or if they're in a media interview or they're in a panel presentation, increasingly those shared moments that somebody has with an audience are going to be the things that AI cannot be part of, right?
The human connection.
The human connection.
In the broadest sense, because those watching our very conversation, well, we don't necessarily know them, or hopefully there will be so many that that it goes beyond our social networks. I mean, the immediate personal social networks, but still there is a certain connection between our conversation and the audience and the topics and the things.
And I think this comes back to what you were saying before, though, because I agree with you. There are certain things that I've got AI to be able to do, and that's fine. But it feels arm's length, doesn't it? And I think that obviously, and we can get into the realm of who's this for and what level do we need it to be at and all the rest of that. And I'm not saying this, I'm actually worried that AI is going to take away all of that stuff. I mean, I don't know that it will, and I'm not anti it, and I do use it. But I do think that it comes back to what you were saying about scientists. If somebody has to go to the meeting and they've pushed something in, it's got this nice frame and all the rest of it, you still have well, this didn't come out of me, right? And I do think that is a big part of it, is that how we own stuff. Like the deep sense of it. And it's like what I talked about, that organization that I was working with, where we pulled various things out and they all came in and they did they all gave me what they thought they should say. And then I'd say, no, what's that? What's this? And, and then we got them to bring in a little bit of color. And of course, I know AI would be able to do some of that, but the point is we pulled it out of them in that moment and it was theirs. Like it felt real to them. One woman cried and that was not
they
because
birthed it.
Yeah, I hate that expression. And I feel that that's where AI... It's a horrible expression, but you're absolutely right. I mean, they gave birth to a cow in a lot of cases. But the point is that we had to struggle to pull it out. Yeah. And it's like with things like one of my concern on some AI is that if people... And I know you ran a survey on this about critical thinking and executive outsourcing.
It was my survey. It was more summary of an existing one.
Okay, well, that's summary. But my concern on a lot of this is that unless you've been through a certain amount of pain... firstly, you're not going to own it, but secondly, you're not going to build the muscle to know. So on things like, for example, critical thinking and writing or gutting a summary, if you don't know, and I know this comes down to the prompting, but you're not going to be able to prompt well if you don't have good judgment. And so say you and I are of the generation, we're pre-digital. So we've had to hack through things with pencils and papers and go through it and score it. And my concern on a lot of this is that we'll get rusty in certain places if we don't do some of it ourselves. Now, of course, there are places where it can massively help, and the automation and this and that and the other. But I do think on certain stuff, and particularly on the oral component, saying, give me the made-to-stick model on this message that I'll take the commission, I think it's too arm's length. And I'm interested in how you then...
I'm actually with you on that. I'm with you on that. And one thing we teach with Jacques, with whom we run these trainings, is the 80-20 rule, kind of a Pareto rule, where it can take you to 80%, but the last mile, so to say, the last 20% has to be yours. You need to exercise critical judgment. You need to exercise good taste, and it needs to be yours. So it can give you good ideas how to frame a certain message, where let's say you aim it at a political audience that loves the word sovereignty, or another audience loves the word whatever, sustainability, and you didn't really see that, so it reveals a certain blind spot that you had. And then it says, okay, well, why don't you use this, or why don't you present this particular message from a different angle. And yet, the last bit, you need to say, am I comfortable saying that? Am I okay with that? That's one part. And the other part, I also very much agree with you that there's value in the effort.
Yeah.
And if it's too easy, it's not going to be as valuable on the consumption side, but even to you, like it's the same thing. I don't like, at some point in my life, I was like, oh, I want to read millions of books. Well, I still want to read millions of books, but here's a list of all the books I want to read. And then there are these apps or tools that give you this blink list or whatever, 3-page, 5-page summary of the book. And I read a couple of those. And a day later, I said, what is it about?
Yeah.
That's the labor that you're trying to save.
Sieved knowledge.
And if you don't go through the whole narrative of a book and everything and actually get through, and maybe like the book, The E-Myth, in the business, on the business, one line, but it's so deep in me because I went through the whole book and with the stories and the examples that it demonstrated, it sticks with me. So that is to say, if you can and should save the labor on mundane task or administrative task and so many other things, but in some cases you got to do the harder work.
Yeah, and it's also, you say 80-20, it might also be the 20-80, as in depending on the kind of person that you are, it might be actually do the 20 first and then get it to build from that. Because the thing on it is that I've pushed buttons on things, they give me this, and then I'm like, look at that and go, what? And actually, yes, you have to come in and use your own judgment, but for me, because I've got ADHD, I look at it and go, oh, that's too much stuff. Or I don't know where, there's not enough.
TLDR. Too long, didn't read.
Yes, exactly. Or like, I would never say that. So then now what I try to do is I start with my stuff and then get it to build from that. Or then I'll come back and, and so, and it's an interesting thing.
It's co-creation.
It is, but I think you have to have I think you have to know, I think the speed of it in a lot of cases, I sometimes feel a bit sick when it produces certain things because sometimes I feel like it's moving much faster than me. It's what you come back to about the pain of giving birth to something. I feel like somehow the baby's out, but hang on a minute.
Yeah, I don't have experience with that, but I have written books and
right. But that's what I mean.
It's a similar thing. It's a painful, laborious.
Yeah,
again, the word labor and laborious, it's all the same. Where
it is all the same, and it doesn't mean
it's an effort.
But it's what you came back to before. If I don't have to do that on my tax return, I'd be absolutely bloody delighted. I mean, there are certain things that if I could automate the hell out of them, I would totally do it. And I'm not saying that other people can't do it. I just think it's going to be a very, what is it? It's the sapiens point. What sets humans apart is the stories, right? We share stories and we tell them, and our brains haven't changed, and we like this, and it's what we respond to in whatever form. And I feel that part of that is also the experience of pulling it out, not just the telling it, but the how do we take it, how do we make it, how do we create it, and how do we take it in our own way and push it around? And everybody has a different way of doing that. And I think that skilled people will be able to integrate using AI into that. But I think a lot of people who don't have the skills or the storytelling skills, isn't necessary. It might make them a bit better, but it's not going to massively help them because sometimes. But it might also be that, well, you know what? Either it's that, or they can't do it at all. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think for people who are quite challenged in communicating, having a nice framework might make them a bit better, but they may still struggle with it because they haven't been through the other stuff that's going to, the pain and the discomfort of having to pull it out and improve it themselves.
Yeah. The deeper understanding of it, because it's not a linear curve, and especially those who already have certain skills, and like you say, those who've already gone through those efforts or competency building or exercises or other, they are the ones who can massively use it, like so much better use it, exponentially better than others who have far more limited experience in the other field.
So this is one of the reasons also why I'm starting my online stuff. So I'm going to fill my online classroom, which is, yes, people can buy some of that, but also because I want to have a longer program. Oh God, here we go. Okay, wait a moment. But the reason for this is, and maybe training sessions, people have a one-on-one or they come to one day and it's great and it's intense and they learn lots of stuff, but then it goes out of the window quite quickly unless they're constantly using the skills, which most of them aren't necessarily. And so it's a bit like going to the gym once and then expecting to look like The Rock. It's unrealistic unless you put yourself through continuous painful and repetitious workouts. And that's how I see it also with speaking and messaging and all of those things. If you don't use it, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm setting up my longer programs, because I think people need to be able to check in and use it in a more regular basis. Anyway, that's what I was going to say. All right, I have to pick a card.
But before you pick that card, just wanted to connect those dots where we started from.
Yeah.
With your trip to South America and all the way to journalism and wherever you are now. And it's really, however you hate the word storytelling, but it is the story that I see a lot of commonalities or points or episode, if you will, which to me, it's an arch. Do you say arch or arc? Never know.
I don't know. Do you mean a narrative arc?
Yeah, narrative arc. Okay, arc is
That's an arc.
like the Minnesota arc, or
that's an arch.
Sorry, the St. Louis, right?
That's an arch.
Arc. Okay.
I know. I don't know, because people do you say overarching or overarching?
I'd say overarching.
Yes, so would
But
I.
anyways,
because
but for this, what I'm trying to say, this
you mean a narrative arc?
narrative arc.
Yeah, story arc. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's ARC.
So with a K.
No, ARC.
Okay,
Isn't
no
it
H.
ARC? Oh God, I don't
ARC,
know.
yeah.
Oh God, now I feel like I'm actually going insane. Can we end this conversation?
Anyways, please pull the card.
Is this a trick? My son's really into magic.
It's
Is this
no
going to be
magic.
like?
It's one question that I'll ask you to answer.
Oh God. Okay. Oh, what do you imagine people say when they gossip about you? I hope they don't gossip about me. Does everybody gossip about everybody else? Grumpy, funny, existentially dissatisfied.
Fair enough.
What do you think? I don't know. What do you think people say when they gossip about you?
It's not fair to throw it back to me. You pull the card.
I will.
Next time I'm sitting here, I'll put my card.
Andras,
Okay.
I'm going to wear this now every time I see you, and you're going to have to tell me. I hate that question.
Anyways, amazing. I very much enjoyed talking to you.
I enjoyed it too.
Again, I really appreciate you being so open about everything that concerns your life.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And good luck with this series. I'm looking forward to hearing it when it comes out. Is it out yet?
It's already,
Cool.
since yesterday, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
I'll send it to my dad. We'll double the listenership. Thanks very much.
And the geographic diversity of it.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.